Okay, in this video we're going to talk about what we call chromatic intervals. So in the last video I just introduced the concept of intervals and we spoke about the major and perfect intervals that were formed part of the C major. So those are actually called what we call the diatonic intervals, which are, sorry, just so your basic, straight from the major scale intervals. You then have what are called chromatic intervals, which are where we introduce a few accidentals, sharps and flats, and then what happens to those intervals. So let's start with some examples. I think that'll be the best place to start. So let's draw an interval. Let's go with that. So here's a little question. What interval is that? See if you can work that one out. Pause the video if you need to. But of course, that is what we call a perfect fifth, okay? We covered that in the last video. That is a perfect fifth. Now, that is a diatonic interval. We're going to turn it into a chromatic interval. What happens if we add a sharp to the top note? Okay, so something does happen to it. It's going to sound different, first of all. It's going to sound a little unusual. It's still going to be a fifth. So what I'm actually going to rub that out. My apologies. I'm going to draw, just so I can have both of them there, I'm going to draw it over here with the sharp. Sorry about that. Okay, so we have a perfect fifth here. We have now added a sharp to that. Now the number doesn't change. Important thing to remember, it is still a fifth. Okay, if we count the notes, it's still going to be 5. Okay, so the number doesn't change, but you guessed it, the type of interval changes. Okay, it is no longer what we call a perfect interval or a perfect fifth. It turns it into an augmented fifth. And we just use A for augmented. So it's just a different sounding fifth. Okay? If instead of adding a sharp, what's the opposite of a sharp? It's a flat. If we add a flat, it does something different again, okay? Once again, it's still a fifth. There's still, if you count the notes, you'll still count to 5. But it goes from perfect, so if we raise it with a sharp, it goes to augmented. If we lower it with a flat, it becomes diminished. Okay? A diminished fifth. In a tick, I'm going to draw a little diagram which will help us with this little, you'll see what I mean. But let's keep moving. So that is what happens to a perfect interval. I'm just going to circle the P. Now the reason I've done that is because if you start with a major interval, adding a sharp and flat does different things, unfortunately. So let's do a major interval. We'll do a nice, easy, well, you tell me. What is that interval there? That, of course, is a major third. Okay? We use a capital M, and that is a major third. Okay? So let's do the same thing. First of all, we're going to add a sharp and see what happens. Okay, so we have added a sharp. Of course, first of all, the number hasn't changed. So it's still a third. But what type of third is it? It's no longer major. It actually does the same thing that it does here. It turns it into an augmented third. Okay? So it's actually the same. Regardless of whether it's a major interval or a perfect interval, and you add a sharp, they both become augmented. Flat is different though. So let's add a flat. Still a third. Any takers of what that might become? It becomes minor. And that's where we use our lowercase m. Okay? That is a minor third. So there's the difference. With a perfect interval, a sharp, and just one note here. when we're talking about adding a sharp or flat, it's only to the top note. The bottom note stays the same. We leave that alone. We're just talking about adding it to the top note. So we add a sharp, it becomes an augmented fifth. We add a flat, it becomes a diminished fifth. But for a major third, adding a sharp does the same thing. It's still an augmented third, but adding a flat, it becomes a minor third. So I'm just going to draw a little diagram up here that will hopefully help us remember that. And it looks like this. Okay, so that's a handy diagram to remember and put in the mind of a perfect interval, and then we can do a similar thing for a major interval. Okay, so I'll just explain what these diagrams mean if you haven't already sort of figured out what it's talking about. So a perfect interval, we add a sharp, we go up, because a sharp raises the pitch. We go up, it makes it an augmented interval. If we have a perfect interval and we lower it with a flat, it goes to diminished. A major interval, sharp does the same thing. They both become augmented, but of course lowering it, that's where it's different. It becomes a minor interval. I'm going to do some more examples because it doesn't just apply to fifths and thirds, it applies to any interval. Okay, so I might do some examples and you can pause the video and see if you can work it out, and then I'll give the answer. So let's go over here, and I'm going to go with that one, which is quite a common chromatic interval. So if you want, pause the video, see if you can work out what that's called, because I'm about to give the answer. So first of all, let's work out the number. What quantity is the interval? So we start here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So it's a sixth. Don't forget when you're counting, you count every line and space. So a sixth is normally a major interval. Okay, so you do need to know the order of what type of intervals they are, first of all. So a major interval, normally, a major sixth, but we've added a flat. So we can just refer to this. A major interval, adding a flat makes it minor. So that's going to become a minor sixth. Okay, let's do another example. Okay, if you want, pause the video and see if you can work it out, because I'm about to give the answer. Okay, let's start with the number. So number is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4. It's a fourth. Okay, and once again, you just need to know the order of what's perfect and what's major. A fourth is normally perfect, starts as a perfect interval, but of course we've put a flat there. So we've added a flat to a perfect interval, it becomes diminished. So that's a diminished fourth. You don't see too many diminished fourths. Some of the chromatic intervals are quite common, and some of them you almost never see. A minor sixth is a very common one. A diminished fourth is not common at all. Let's do a couple more. Okay. Once again, if you want to pause the video and work that one out, I'm about to give the answer. So let's work out the number first. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So an eighth, or an octave, referred to. Now an octave or an eighth is a perfect interval, but we've added a sharp. Now it doesn't actually matter, we don't even really need to refer to these because it does the same thing. A sharp makes it augmented. So that is an augmented eighth or an augmented octave. You won't see those too often. Let's do another one. All right, if you want, once again, pause the video and you can work out that because I'm about to give the answer. So the number, that is a seventh. Normally a seventh is major, but once again, actually doesn't matter. It's because whether it's perfect or major, it's going to always be augmented. So that, once again, is augmented. So there is quite a good summary of what can happen with your chromatic intervals. if you see a sharp, it's going to pretty much always be augmented. Only within C major though. This does get a little bit more complicated in other key signatures, but we're just going to worry about C major for now. So within C major, if we add sharps, it's always going to be augmented. But adding a flat does different things depending on whether it was perfect or major. So the major sixth went to a minor sixth, and the perfect fourth went to a diminished fourth. So that is chromatic intervals. So it does, as I've mentioned a few times throughout the video, it does require you to know what that order of intervals is within a major scale. And does anyone know the order? If you want, once again, pause the video and see if you can write down the order. Then we're going to write down the order right now. So a unison is perfect. A second is major, major third, perfect fourth, perfect fifth, major sixth, major seventh, perfect octave. There's the order there. So as I said, when we were working these ones out, we did need to know what that order is, or I mean, whether you remember the order, memorize it, whatever. So hopefully that all makes sense. Chromatic intervals.